What does the fruit pomegranate evoke for you? Well, in China, it's a metaphor that symbolizes the unity of the Chinese nation. Chinese President Xi Jinping has used this metaphor on many occasions, saying, I quote, "The people of all 56 ethnic groups remain closely united, like the seeds of a pomegranate." As the country celebrates the upcoming National Day, this topic is in the spotlight again. Why does China focus so much on ethnic unity? Is it just wishful thinking or reality on the ground? What does it mean for people outside of the country? To discuss these questions, I'm pleased to be joined from Beijing by David Ferguson, Honorary Chief English Editor of Foreign Languages Press. Also from Beijing by Xia Lu, Research Fellow of the National Academy of Development and Strategies at Renmin University of China. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. David, let me go to you first because you were largely responsible for translating Xi Jinping's thought on governance. You oversaw the English editing. What is ethnic unity for China to you? Does it differ from other countries which also have many ethnic minority groups?
I think, good morning, Professor, as well. I think that's a very important and interesting question to start with. There's a very big difference between ethnic issues in China and in countries like the UK and the USA. If you look at the UK, we have significant ethnic minorities, but they are largely a result of Britain's colonial past. They're not indigenous peoples, they're displaced peoples. You have Afro-Caribbeans, you have Indians, you have Pakistanis. Even if they've been in the UK for generations, they tend to live in enclaves, and that can create social tension, which can result in conflict. In the US, it's even worse because the biggest single ethnic minority are African Americans, and the legacy that they carry is the burden of slavery. So in the West, ethnic minorities are a problem. They're a problem to be addressed. How do you prevent social tension from erupting into conflict? In China, the situation is completely the reverse. Ethnic minorities are indigenous peoples. They don't live in enclaves because the lands that they occupy have traditionally been the lands for hundreds or thousands of years. So in China, ethnic peoples have problems, and China's task has to be to understand these problems and remedy them. Unfortunately, in the West, people are only capable of seeing things in terms of their own frame of reference. So in the West, we have problems with our ethnic minorities, therefore China must have problems with their ethnic minorities, therefore whatever they are doing is wrong. That is the fundamental difference. It's a really important difference to understand if you're going to talk about the subject.
Allow me to tell our audience a story, because this just didn't come out of nowhere. After after David introduced the overall background, there is this story. In 1950, that's 1 year after the founding of the People's Republic, some members of different ethnic groups in Pu'er in southwest China's Yunnan province. Yunnan province, by the way, is a very special province where there are a lot of indigenous ethnic groups. There are ethnic groups that live across the borders, meaning some of them in China, some of them in neighboring countries. There are also a lot of ethnic groups in Yunnan that are specific to Yunnan. They're only in Yunnan, and there are a lot of autonomous cities, towns, regions in Yunnan of these ethnic groups. Anyway, in 1950, some members of some ethnic groups in Yunnan, in a place called Pu'er, which is famous for its black tea, were invited to Beijing to celebrate the first anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic. After they returned, these villagers held an oath-taking ceremony and put up a tablet as a testimony. So what do the inscriptions say? Well, they killed a buffalo, it says, and they drank sacred water to seal their oath. And the oath goes that they will wholeheartedly unite behind the leadership of the Communist Party of China and build an equal, free, and happy big family, quote unquote. 48 villagers from 16 ethnic groups signed that tablet. That was in 1950. And now, fast forward 74 years, their descendants, the descendants of these villagers, wrote a letter to President Xi, updating him on the progress in their home. And President Xi replied to that letter, calling the Chinese notion a big family where 56 ethnic groups love and care for each other. So, Professor Xia, why is this story highlighted? What does China want to tell through this story? Why reminding people of that tablet now?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me in this talk. Actually, although I've never been to Pu'er, I share these stories with my students in my class every time when we talk about the founding of the People's Republic of China, and also the history of China, and also this kind of a traditional, one of the important traditional, the good that Chinese leaders or Chinese elites have been pursuing. So, in my opinion, this story is important in the following three aspects. First of all, this national unity is not a new kind of pursuit. It's not a new goal. Actually, it has been pursued, within, or we can say during the last 2,000 years of ancient China, because each and every important political leader will pursue this great goal, and that is not only about the political unity, but also about the cultural unity, the ethical unity, and also other kind of a social integration. So this is the first dimension about history, about this kind of transition of history tradition. The second point is that when this event happened in the very beginning period or early period of the PRC, actually it represented a social integration policy, or a policy aiming at social integration, not only about the Han Chinese, but also about all ethnic groups under the leadership of New China, the People's Republic of China. So it is a very good signal, not only to the minor ethnic group, but also to the rest of China, and also to the rest of the world. The Chinese central government has the ability to integrate all social groups. And also the third dimension is that...
go ahead, very quickly, please.
The national unity or the ethnic unity is the foundation for the development, for the modernization. That's the third dimension for the future.
Yes. David, what do you, what can you add on that? Because when you talk about integration, when you talk about this kind of idea, people would associate with what is happening in Western societies. Do you see a difference between the Chinese practice, highlighting unity, with the Western, the other model of integration or assimilation? Is there connections? Are there similarities, differences?
Well, a couple of very important issues in China. The first one is, why do they place so much emphasis on ethnic unity? Because you have a country where you have one massive majority and a large number of very small minorities. And there is always a risk, unless you actively work to make sure it's not happening, there's always a risk that sorry, are you still with me?
Yes.
There's always a that the small populations will be neglected and become isolated. So there has to be an active policy of integration. I think one of the most important aspects of it is language, teaching ethnic minorities to speak Chinese. This is often portrayed in the West in extreme versions as some form of cultural genocide, which is idiotic. If you think about it from the perspective, for example, of a Tibetan, if you're a Tibetan who only speaks Tibetan, then you're part of a social and economic unit of 3 million people speaking a language that nobody else on the planet understands or speaks. And that has a huge impact on your development prospects. If you speak Chinese, then you become part of a social and economic unit of 1.4 billion people, and your development prospects are multiplied by a factor of 400 or 500.
So how does China manage that balance of unifying everybody under some common framework or platform, but also trying to preserve their rich heritage and culture, including language?
Well, for a start, there's no reason why China wouldn't want to do that. China's ethnic minorities are indigenous Chinese people, and there is no reason why anybody in China would not want to value or protect China's cultural heritage, China's ethnic cultural heritage. China puts a huge amount of effort into that work. I mean, I've just been to Xizang, to Tibet, just a couple of weeks ago, and I visited the Tibet University, specifically the Institute for the Protection of Ancient Tibetan Texts. And it was hugely impressive to listen to these people, to see the work they're doing, to understand their passion for protecting that culture. In fact, they gave me a gift when I was there, which is the latest editions of 2 volumes of ancient Tibetan texts, which had been compiled, conserved, and restored. And nobody could speak to these people and not feel moved by their passion and commitment to that cause.
Professor Xia, how is China balancing the unity versus diversity in its actual policies concerning ethnic minorities?
This is a kind of a very good question. Actually, I will go to Xizang right after the National Day holiday vacation. They invite me to the Bureau of Education for a talk about the Chinese past modernization. So here is my point. The central government or the CPC can balance the unity and the diversity based on the mutual benefit, based on the common prosperity. Because that is, when we talk about the common prosperity, we only talk about the reduction of the poverty in those kind of Han Chinese area, or the reduction of the poverty between the poor and the rich. Actually, this is also one of the key points made by President Xi Jinping when he talked about a common prosperity, when he talked about the Chinese past modernization, that not a single one ethnic group should be left out, and not a single group of people should be left out in terms of, or in a way to modernization. And that would be the foundation for the diversity or balance between the diversity and the unity.
Okay.
And the other point is like this.
I'm afraid, Professor Xia, we don't have time to go in there. This is a big topic, but we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Xia Lu, Research Fellow of the National Academy of Development and Strategies at Renmin University of China, and David Ferguson, Honorary Chief English Editor of Foreign Languages Press.